Mr. Bachchan, may I request you to please stay on stage? Thank you. Mr. Srinivasan Swamy, may I request you to please join Mr. Bachchan on stage? Thank you. Mr. Bachchan, before presenting the final set of awards, may I request you to please share a few words with us? You may use the podium. I can give you the mic. There you go.
Take that, yeah.
Sure.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I just say how very privileged I feel tonight to be invited to this prestigious award night and to be made a part of an evening that honors the winners of the Olive Crown Awards. Most of you that have been decorated belong to the world of advertising, media, and marketing. Advertising, media, marketing, AMM, or ARM, as you would like to call it. In today's election and political climate, maybe it would be appropriate for me to simply not make any further attempts to complete what would normally come after this word. But just to say for now that none of you are ARM in any manner, so let me first congratulate all the winners for tonight and congratulate the award ceremony for giving them this recognition. Your work, ladies and gentlemen, is as impressive as it is important, and so we need to ponder over one very important aspect this evening. And the aspect is about climate change and what we want to leave for our children and our grandchildren. A world that is degraded environmentally, shorn of its tree cover, stripped of its animal life, a world where they would have to step out wearing pollution masks, a world where rivers are cesspools of filth, where ill health lurks around every corner. This, my friends, is not presenting an exaggerated picture at all. One look at the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change set up by United Nations, the IPCC, would set off alarm bells in any Indian's mind. It clearly says that the effects of climate change are already evident in India, and they are definitely man-made. The silver lining being that it goes on to say that things could be reversed even now if bold and urgent steps are taken. I have a different opinion on that, to which I may come to later. The World Bank is similarly unequivocal. Their report says that India loses a staggering $80 billion per annum, equal to 3.7% of its GDP, on account of environmental degradation. And incidentally, this report takes into account the relative benefits and losses of economic growth versus environmental degradation, and then arrives at this number. I might be preaching to the converted already in this audience, but I genuinely feel that all communicators, and that includes all of us here tonight, need to take this matter more seriously and do whatever we can to ensure we stop this mindless destruction of planet Earth. I'm very pleased that the India chapter of the IAA are conducting the Olive Crown Awards like a cause. A subject like this deserves nothing else. I am pleased to hear that the Olive Crown Awards have been accepted by the industry completely, and they are growing all over Asia. Structured and sustained communication can increase awareness about these problems, focus attention on what needs to be done, and also inspire the industry to take a more responsible attitude to our environment. It is awards like these that inspire creative communicators to bring out their best and scale new heights of excellence in their attempt to effectively communicate sustainability. Someone wisely said that saving the tiger is not just about saving a magnificent animal. The tiger is a mere metaphor for the entire value chain that would flourish if that one animal roamed free and proliferated. I have worked towards the Save the Tiger campaign, and I'm sure that Mrs. Maneka Gandhi would endorse what I have to say. We're all connected to the planet Earth, and we need to teach or treat each other with respect and care we owe to each other. In that lies a green and healthy future for our children. I wish the IAA and the winners of the Olive Crown Awards all success. Beyond this, I wish to make a few submissions. It is the world's poorest people who are the hardest hit by devastating droughts, floods, and other extreme weather conditions. This is a massive injustice. Climate change is caused by the world's richest countries. What we need to do, and especially for this community to do, is a few of the following things. One is to reduce the vulnerability of the disasters made worse and more numerous by climate change, and to help them adapt to the longer-term challenges which a changing climate poses. The other is to work with organizations to share our learning of what works well and what can be done to make programs of work with poor communities even more effective. Working with national and international bodies around the world to create and strengthen policies which reduce emissions and encourage funding and focus on adaptation to climate change. Working with schools and teachers to encourage the delivery of effective, exciting climate change lessons which engage today's young people in the issues of climate change, creating a generation of global citizens who understand the impact of their actions on the environment and people around the world. The last is the launching and supporting campaigns designed to raise awareness of the impacts of climate change on vulnerable communities and enabling them to take tangible action to support strong and urgent change at the local, national, and international level. As we speak, what needs to be done here is that we must not ignore the efforts made by the international community. Those that knowledge themselves with climate change are aware of the many conventions that have been held in the recent past in Kyoto and in Copenhagen. The Kyoto Protocol brought about, through extensive research and discussion, some very important facts, but helpful, and some of them extremely alarming. One concern that is foremost in my mind comes from an example I wish to take of one of our immediate neighbors, Bangladesh. It is believed that Bangladesh is the most vulnerable nation in the world as far as climate change and its effects are concerned. But the irony is that it is not entirely responsible for its condition. Already vulnerable to changes in weather patterns, Bangladesh's population of 160 million, many of whom are among the poorest in the world, are responsible for a scant amount of the world's carbon emissions. The South Asian country contributes 0.3 tons of carbon dioxide per capita annually, 0.3%. The United States, ladies and gentlemen, emits 22 tons, and Switzerland about 6 tons. Let me just elaborate on what this means. Units have been designed to account for the amount of carbon that each nation emits. The largest number of points are given to those nations that have the least carbon emissions, and vice versa. So Bangladesh, having perhaps the least amount of emissions, falls a victim to an act which it does not propagate, putting it therefore in the category of a most vulnerable nation. Its vulnerability is not of its making, but of the making of the richer and more affluent nations. That, to me, is a tragic irony of immense proportion. But there is more. I may not have the correct details, but from my very limited knowledge, I believe that procedures have been set at many of these climate conventions, like Kyoto and Copenhagen, that in order to restore some kind of balance in the emission percentages and numbers, it is possible for those nations whose numbers are large to purchase points from those nations whose numbers are seemingly in excess. Developing countries like India and China want hundreds of billions of dollars in exchange for emission cuts. These hundreds of billions of dollars are needed and utilized for infrastructure building and industrialization, an essential input to drive your country towards development. And the question that comes to mind is, do we want the development or the exigencies of climate change? The poor, ladies and gentlemen, need more than just hot air from Copenhagen. The United Nations believes that a 1-meter rise in sea level would cause Bangladesh to lose 17% of its coastal area. But the country which may have a moral case of emissions cuts has little to barter away. Along with the Maldives and a handful of small islands in the Pacific Ocean, Bangladesh has been the poster child for climate change. Coastal area loss is most visible here in India, in one of our most popular beach resorts, Goa. Some years ago, when we would go to shoot our films there, we would stay at the Fort Aguada Resort, and I'm sure that many among you would be aware of it. And one of the attractions of the resort was that early morning walk and run on the beach that was just below it. It extended for miles right down to the very famous Baga Beach, and it was wide enough to contain many huts and other facilities. Recently, I happened to visit Goa again on a private visit and went again to the Fort Aguada Resort and discovered, to my dismay and absolute horror, that there was no beach left at all. The sea level had wiped out the entire beach. People at the grassroots levels are not aware of Copenhagen. They're totally in the dark. They are saying it's a curse of the gods. They are blaming their fate. And this is where this community that sits in this hall today needs to address these problems. The arm intelligentsia, if I may be permitted to call you that, needs to reflect upon this. Grand conferences need actually to be listening to the poor and to the local scientists. It is not as though the international affluent community is completely unaware or has distanced itself from the problem. Many, through the United Nations, have been asked to pay deposits up to $10 billion to those regions that suffer. Switzerland wants to see a global CO2 tax, following the principle of polluter pays, which we heard about from Mrs. Menaka Gandhi. Japan says it needs a green tax on fossil fuels to fight global warming. But with no agreements negotiated in advance, Copenhagen's veneer has been dulled by a lack of clarity over just what it will actually accomplish. I think we are dramatizing Copenhagen quite a bit, says a voice of the United Nations' 15th major global warming conference. We are raising all sorts of expectations, and I heavily doubt it will be delivering to the level of expectations that has been raised. I do not think we have done enough to justify this level of pomp and grandeur. While the rest of the world talks, Bangladeshis will continue building up the embankments that protect their communities from floods, reclaim their mangrove forests, and plant more wind-breaking trees, all part of their own struggle against climate change. What is happening in Bangladesh is too close for comfort, which is why these awards tonight deserve to be applauded and lauded but they are creating the much-needed awareness that is so desperately needed. Experts now are linking climate change and human rights. By directly affecting people's living conditions, global warming has direct consequences on human rights. Climate change is a specific threat to the right to food, housing, and drinking water for millions of individuals. And at least 50 million people will be displaced by climate change-related phenomena by the year 2050. Study warns us that climate change is irreversible. Many effects of global warming are irreversible. Global temperatures could remain high for 1,000 years, even if carbon emissions were to be halted, so say the scientists. People think that if we start doing something about carbon emissions, the problem will just go away. This is not entirely the case. It has long been known that some of the carbon dioxide emitted by human activities stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years. But the new study advances the understanding of how this affects the climate system. Research papers describe what will happen in the atmospheric concentration of CO2 if it reaches 450 to 600 parts per million, ppm as it is called, up from 385 ppm today. Most climate researchers considered 450 ppm virtually inevitable and 600 ppm difficult to avoid by the year 2050 if the use of fossil fuels continues at the present rate that it is. Looking at just the expansion of warming ocean waters without melting glaciers and polar ice sheets, the authors have found that the irreversible global average sea level rise by the year 3000 would be at least 1.3 to 3.2 feet, 0.4 to about 1.0 meters. If CO2 peaked at 600 ppm and double that amount if CO2 peaked at 1,000 ppm. I don't think that the very long time scale of the persistence of these effects has been understood. In closing, I'd just like to say, cynics often bring up the oft-repeated question that it is all very well to invite a celebrity to occasions such as this award night and give him the liberty to air his voice on what is wrong and what needs to be done, without ever questioning his own pontifications. I'd like to say that I built my house in the Juhu Ville Parle scheme on approximately 2,000 square yards of land in the year 1976. And 1,000 square yards of that land is environmental green. And that is the way that I have always wanted it, despite many efforts by commercial real estate developers to build and make a lot of money on it. Solar power, too, plays an important role in environmental protection. Through an organization which my family promotes, as do I, we have started the process of bringing electricity to approximately 3,000 villages through solar power, and it is an ongoing process. The Siddhi Vinayak temple, which all of you are aware of here in Mumbai, is one such structure where we have provided this facility. Its attractive lighting that you see at night is the result of efficient solar power, which we initiated. As an individual and as a proud citizen of our great nation, these are some of the efforts that we strive for. Ladies and gentlemen, what are you going to do? Thank you.